All right, we're live.
All right. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. It's a little rainy and windy here in Northern California. However, we are so excited here at the Code Enforcement Network to bring forth another great interview with the awesome Brian Morris. So, for those of you that don't know Brian, Brian is the Code Enforcement Director for the city of South Fulton in Georgia. Now, South Fulton, the city of South Fulton, is a 4 years new city in Georgia, and Brian has the pleasure of leading the amazing code enforcement team in that city. It actually is Atlanta's twin city in Georgia, so there's a lot that we're going to learn today from Mr. Brian Morris. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Cecilia, for a great introduction. And thank you and Pete for having me here today. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you guys. I study you and watch you both from afar. And it's just a pleasure to be on here and talk about this field of code enforcement that we love so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Brian, I think it's always important when we meet someone new, right, to get to know them a little bit. And I know that, our audience is always so keen at getting to know who's out there, to establish networks and build our village of code enforcement officers and administrators. So, Brian, can you tell us a little bit about yourself as far as your profession in code enforcement, how you got started, what drew you to it, what led you to today?
Okay, sure. But before I do, I did bring something just for Pete. I know I usually say
Oh, yeah.
No.
just for you, Pete.
Oh, that was not cool.
Yes, well played, well played.
It was, yes.
So with that being said, code enforcement to me is just I kind of fell into it. So I've been in the field of code enforcement for just made 9 years, which I've been fortunate and blessed to have some different role models and mentors along the way because that's a relatively short time. However, I feel like it's been 20 years. I feel like this is what I've been doing for a long time. And I just I went from doing real estate construction and management through the 2000s. And as you all remember, 2007, 2008, the market went, belly up. And I was a part of that tidal wave that hit the whole entire country. And so I needed a job. I just needed to, I did some hustling and did some different things between there to keep the bills paid. But I was, starting a family. I needed a job. And I had a family friend that was in the field of code enforcement, and they knew my work ethic and wanted me to come join. My construction background was beneficial, and just started out just as kind of a bridge. It was just something to do while I waited on the market to turn, or while I waited on another entrepreneurial activity to kind of kick off, right? And just sometimes, man plans and God laughs. And just things kind of fell into place where a leadership opportunity opened in my previous jurisdiction within about a year and a half. And nobody was there. The person that brought me in left and left a void. We were honestly not checked on for like 45 days. And so the type of person I am, I wasn't the most experienced, but the work had to be done. So I just started doing it. Started putting SOPs together, started kind of just taking a leadership position, just more out of necessity to keep things rolling. And I just worked myself into a team lead position and just kind of worked into elevated from there to a supervisor and just kind of worked that process for a couple of years. And that's how I got my feet wet. It was just a trial by fire. And that's what brought me into code enforcement. And as time went on, I just grew to love what we do and seeing what the impact it has on a community when it comes to the quality of life, when it comes to the property values, and then most importantly, what it did for me as a person as far as developing skills of reaching out to people, of interacting with different types of people. It was code enforcement has been very beneficial for me in that regard because it develops those skills you have to have. You have to be a counselor. You have to be an officer, an enforcer. You have to be part lawyer. You have to be, your son, nephew. You have to be all of these roles in the community depending on who you're talking to. So we wear different hats every single day. and different times of the day. So I just fell in love with the field.
So,
Yeah.
Brian, in code enforcement, I can't wear the Atlanta hat, but one thing, one thing that kind of always makes me curious. Okay, when you were doing that construction, what you saw a code enforcement position open up, what made you think that was for you? I mean, just out of curiosity.
Pete, honestly, it wasn't at that time. I wish I could say it was divine intervention. It was just something that stood out to me. But it wasn't that deep at that time. It was just an opportunity that happened to be there that fit my, my skill set, I thought, and out of necessity, had a young family and I needed a steady check. The real estate hustle and different things that I was doing was just not lucrative enough at the time because the economy sucked. So it was, and I tell people this all the time. It was 28.9 was a salary, 28,900, and I happily accepted it because I needed it at that time. So it was just as simple as that. It was an opportunity there, some stability for my family, and I jumped at it.
And one thing that so in code enforcement, I sometimes teach a class about code enforcement and marketing and all this and that. And I always show a picture of the Breakfast Club because we're a pish posh of just oddballs in code enforcement sometimes. And,
Right.
and that's actually developed now because there's people that want to come into the profession. Some people like myself stumbled into the profession where I wouldn't say I failed, but I didn't succeed in my previous goal. And I ended up in code enforcement, and I fell in love with it in day one. And even today, we got to meet you through the internet because you're out there and you're hustling, you're promoting code enforcement, and this is what we love. We love people promoting code enforcement, and that's why I asked, like, was it something that you're like, I want to be a code officer when I grow up? Nobody ever says that, but now they do. You have little kids saying, hey, I want to be a code officer when I grow up. And that wasn't our case when in the 2007s, 2008s, we were just kind of assigned to code enforcement but now people are, hustling to get into code enforcement because it's such a great profession and we do make a difference.
No doubt, no doubt. And let me add a key piece to that of something that impacted me greatly. And this was as I was a young, I was still a rookie, and went down to visit to train in GATE, Georgia Association of Code Enforcers, and just found some good information, good networking, and I had the opportunity to get trained and taught by a gentleman named Marcus Keller. And when I saw the way that he interacted with the crowd and the group of students, the way that he explained the ordinances, the knowledge that he had, the passion that he had for code enforcement, and most importantly, the professionalism that he brought to it, right? That it's not just, we're blue collar in a certain sense, but now in some cases we're white collar, So, but you need both in order to have that seat at the table. You can't just be a technician and a tactician when it comes to code enforcement if you want to do that at a high level. You have to have, some high education behind it, a good legal understanding of zoning, engineering. You have to be very much well-rounded, right? And that's when I saw that as a one-year rookie, that was kind of my guidepost to say, well, hold on, that is a future. That's what I see that I would want to emulate that. And even though Marcus and I didn't communicate very closely through the years, but that always stuck with me, and I kept in touch with him. But that image stuck with me of what a code enforcement administrator, director, leader should exemplify. So I tell him that all the time. I know he's tired of hearing it, but I wanted to say it publicly because it did make such an impact just to show this is a possibility of what is available in our field.
Brian, every time I have a conversation or we have a conversation here on this network and our other platforms with our other programs that we hold, I always really like to listen intently at some of the things that you share. And I got to say that there's 4 things that stood out to me just in that conversation that we just started. And we're only about 10 minutes in, but it was really key points. And so I want to kind of go through some of them. You mentioned, obviously, in your journey, in your story, and letting us know how it is that you got here today. You said that you had a changed perspective, right? You have an appreciation for this current profession based on coming into it. You talked about passion and you talked about mentorship. And so I want to get back to what you said. We have a direct care for the things that we do in code enforcement because it's rewarding. You're a social worker, you're a brother, you're an uncle, you're, a father, whatever it may be. We play a variety of different roles and wear a variety of different hats. And I think there's something to be said about what we do that ties into what you said about changed perspective and passion. When you allow for your perspective to change, it starts building and fueling that passion that you have for the work that we do. And I think that that's what's so instrumental for those of us that are in this profession, because we wouldn't be able to do this job because it's tough at times, right? Just when we think we've seen it all, there's one more thing that gets thrown our way and you're like, wow, that's crazy. Or you get that really hairball case where you're like, where am I going to start? How am I going to get this done? And then at the end of that compliance time frame and it gets all done, you're like, oh my gosh, that's me. I did that. That's my work. That's my team. They did that. It got done. And it's so rewarding. And then you talked about Mr. Marcus Kellum and the mentorship component. We just had a conversation last week with one of our other shows, Coffee with My Girlfriends, and we were talking about opportunity, missed opportunity when it presents itself, being able to manifest opportunity. And you said something to the effect of, I started out, field work, swinging that hammer, what have you, in construction, landed in code enforcement. Here I am. I have a great team. We had one story shared by Miss Tana Bryan who mentioned, hey, I was a truck driver. And then I saw a sign and it said code enforcement, for an employment, and I took a chance. And I think it goes back to that. We fall into opportunity if we allow ourselves to do so. And for those of you that are Kobe Bryant fans like I am, he quoted, everything negative, pressure, challenges, it's all an opportunity to rise. It's all an opportunity to rise. And I think that's so instrumental with your story, Brian, because it's a true indication of what it takes, right? When you fall into that opportunity, when you allow yourself to grow in the opportunity and then have that changed perspective. In addition, and I was telling Brian earlier, y'all that are joining in, getting to know him a little bit, wanting to know a little bit more about what makes him, I found some really important things that he has done. And so I want to touch on that. So earlier in the year, Brian was able to speak on behalf of code enforcement in preventing crime and violations in the city of South Fulton. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yes, absolutely. That was an interesting story, interesting situation. So, like I say, we're in the city of South Fulton. I grew up here. This is the home of a lot of famous athletes, rappers, entertainers, and we have a street that's somewhat notorious. It's called Old National Highway, or as we call it, Old Nat L, right? And there's a complex that I actually used to live in on Old Nat L, and that's Camelot. And this is one of those, when you mentioned, Cecilia, challenges, one of the things that keep me going every day is the constant challenge of code enforcement. I'm a puzzle guy. I'm an introvert by nature. Some people don't believe that, but I'm an introvert. And, I like challenges, puzzles, numbers, math, and that's what code enforcement does. Every day is a challenge. It's a new problem, a new variable, a new situation that you have not seen before, And so this case with Camelot this could be a whole podcast. It's a individually owned condominium complex, 345 units. And it makes it difficult for enforcement because the HOA is broke, right? So the outside maintenance is unkept, trash, grass, burglary, robbery, homicide, arson, you name it, takes place in this complex, and it's wide open. For those that have seen the old movie New Jack City, people call it the Carter, which was the complex that Nino Brown ran in the projects in New York City. And that's kind of how wide open, to a lesser degree, this complex is. And our enforcement paths are limited because these are individually owned units. and you can't get blood from a turnip. In this case, that's the HOA. So we're just kind of going in circles trying to enforce it. And we were called out in regard to this property because there was actually a triple homicide slash arson. So there was a triple homicide followed by an arson that was connected to the triple homicide. And of course, that made pretty big news. And we had, a lot of the county commissioners, city, the mayor, council people were out, as well as community advocates trying to save Camelot. So, it's difficult because I know the truth is that in some ways it's an unsolvable problem, but at the same time, you want to give some type of hope and bright light. So, we just spoke on what our role would be, and that would be to try to identify the vacant properties. Our first step is to stop the bleeding. We want to cut off access from criminal elements to that property, and shut down vacant units, and ensure, along with fire and police, which we worked in conjunction with, make sure that the sprinkler systems are working. Make sure they have fire prevention and detection devices in those units. And that's what we've been doing. So that's what I was kind of speaking on at that point, just the magnitude of the problem and just presenting, code enforcement's efforts. And we pretty much led the way along with fire and police, but we were the tip of the spear when it comes to minimizing the damage. We couldn't correct all of it, but we are taking steps toward at least, stopping some of the health and safety violations that lead to easy access for the criminal environment. So we made some progress in that, and that's been one of my most interesting, still ongoing, but one of the most interesting cases to date because of how big the magnitude is.
And in your Brian, in your experience, how important is it that you form those partnerships with the police department when you're dealing with these types of neighborhoods? Because some of us in code enforcement will never deal with that amount of danger. Some of us don't have gang areas. Some of us don't have, little drug fortresses. So
Right.
how do you partner with your local police department, and how do you continue that relationship?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's essential for us to have because of the area that we're in. And like I say, not to paint the picture that it's all one way. Like I say, we have some very affluent areas, very nice areas. We have some rural areas. It's just like a hodgepodge city because it was put together. But we take safety very seriously. We have our police radios that we can radio into. You see hanging behind me on my door, we have bulletproof vests where we're out in certain areas. So we work directly with PD. We have great relationships with the chief and with the captain of community policing, who is awesome and works with us and anything that we need. We actually have an incident now. We've had a series of threats that came in over the weekend, and by a person that is probably not right in the head, but he sent me a series of maybe 40 texts of profanity laced, just, what he's going to do. He's going to kill the next person that comes on the property. He has killer dogs. He has pistols. He has the whole 9 yards. So this is somebody that's a violator. So we contacted police. We put reports together, put restraining orders, and they'll be providing some police presence outside of our building, until we can get this guy apprehended and kind of get him some help he needs or get him arrested. So it's essential to have that working relationship and that mutual respect with police, and we try to nurture those relationships, man, without a doubt.
And I think when you get these types of safety concerns, you did everything right. You contact the police, you're taking action. In our experience, when we talk to some of victims of violence and code enforcement, a lot of times they brushed off, they're not serious, or that guy's just having a bad day. We always have to take any threat credible, as in our experience, because people aren't going to just say that if they don't have something in them to say those things. So well, thank you for taking that action and taking it to as serious a matter as it is. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and getting back to a couple of points, Brian, when you did speak on behalf of code enforcement and the role that it plays in the community, alongside with police and fire, I think there's something to be said in that, for a very long time and truly in the history of code enforcement, we've always been what I'd like to call a silent hero, right? Where we do a lot of work, a lot of legwork. A lot of it is unfortunately not recognized, but we don't do it for the glory. We do it for the safety component of the constituents that we serve and the cities that we serve. However, we play a vital role in ensuring that we maintain those communities and that we revitalize and that we continue to support them so that they can thrive, so that we can deter the crime, as you had already mentioned. And what I really appreciate about you speaking on code enforcement is not only did you speak on our vital role that we play, but you also made a promise. You pledged, right? I'm making a pledge to be able to create safe communities throughout our city, to be able to do what we can in the sense of code enforcement so that we can go out there and change the narrative in our communities. And I think it was really fundamental what you said as far as the difference in affluent parts of your city, right? We all have those where we know that perhaps the calls for service in those areas are a lot lower than the other areas that are underserved. And that right there plays a significant role in the amount of crime that you see popping up, gang activity, drug activity, human trafficking activity. I mean, it's a variety of different things that end up plaguing those communities because of the fact that you have rundown, substandard housing. And this is where we come in as far as code enforcement, right? To come in and change that narrative, to change the game of things, to really give opportunities to those, families that are in these areas, give them a fighting chance. I think what you said about officer safety is also super instrumental. Not only was it the right steps, but the fact that Brian, that you recognized, wait a minute, these are threats, whether they're valid or not. I'm going to take action to protect myself and my staff and myself. Right? I'm not going to just brush it off. I'm going to make sure that I set forth some standards. Say if somebody comes in and complains, even if they say, I'm going to do this or I'm going to get my dogs or whatever it may be, right? You still took action. And I think that that's where it all starts. Being able to solidify those relationships with our law enforcement department, because let's call it what it is. We're not law enforcement, right? We're code enforcement. We play a vital role. And I think it's important for us not to necessarily mesh and get lost in translation, but really know and accept our role, and at the same time solidify the relationship with law enforcement so that we can have that lifeline with them. Being able to get a restraining order, being able to get the word out, having your city patrolled to make sure that you guys are safe, even extending that to the point of, well, maybe we're going to lay off this property for a week or two, let the person cool down, then we'll maybe go back out in teams or with law enforcement, not by ourselves, is so instrumental. And I think that oftentimes, and it goes back to a lot of the communication that we do, hearing everything that you're saying and watching your demeanor, Brian, I can already tell, right? Okay, he's very cool, calm, collected. And I think that is also huge. In fact, I know it's huge because it plays into verbal de-escalation, right? Being able to keep your cool, being able to understand, hey, when I go out there, they're going to know that I'm code enforcement. They're probably going to expect some sort of bad news already. They're going to be edgy. They're going to be defensive because, hey, it's code enforcement, right? Or code compliance. So they're already kind of feeling nervous about it. How we show up plays a huge role, irregardless of what you have on, right? Irregardless of what you're wearing. Our attitude, our presence, the words that we choose, the gestures, the kinesics that we use play a vital role into how we have that communication and that approach. So I cannot applaud you enough for your approach and how you handle your officer safety component. I think that's pretty remarkable.
Thank you.
Also, I don't want to focus too much on the bad area of South Fulton because, like you said, there's multiple areas. But one of the things that, like you just said, you're describing the broken window theory, to a T,
Right.
And people forget we're the reverse engineers of the broken window theory because we're trying to clean it back up so
Yeah.
people can come back in instead of move out. So I think people forget that, and that theory is there. It's true because I've seen cities deteriorate. People move out, people that don't care move in, and it just becomes like it just grows. So mitigating those issues lessens the amount of issues that we have. Now, one thing that something in South Fulton that we spoke about was this is a newer city in Georgia, correct? This is the newest city in Georgia.
New York City, yes, it is.
The newest city. So now, can you tell us how that transition was for you? And how was it? Because none of us get to experience incorporating a city or starting a new department. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's pretty unique in your story.
It is. It definitely is. So I'm a lifelong resident of this city, which prior to this was unincorporated Fulton County. And what happened, just a kind of a brief history, is that it's the biggest county in Georgia. It houses city of Atlanta. It houses much of the airport. Jackson Hartsfield Airport. So it's the county seat is Atlanta, which is the state capital, of course. And so a lot of the northern cities were a little bit more prominent, started to form cities. The northern counties started to annex themselves into cities, to incorporate themselves into cities. And these were the affluent areas. And as they started to take out, bit by bit, Sandy Springs and Milton and different parts of that county, it left a blob, which was the rest of the county. And people were cherry picking, right? So people were just cherry picking this part. Hey, I like this neighborhood. I like this piece of land. I want to take. So the cities were just kind of picking apart the southern end of the county. And what the residents and the commissioners did was they put a campaign for, hey, before we lose any further ground, let's go ahead and incorporate into a city. And that's where the city of South Fulton was formed. So, and if you look at the shape of it, it's interesting because you can tell it's not a design city. It is not. A design city would be in a certain shape. This one it surrounds different cities and it goes in here and it goes out there. So it's somewhat of a, I'm not gonna say a nightmare, but it's a challenge to enforce it. But so it's growing pains that come with that, because the other counties and cities around us were established in 1875 and in 1893, and we're established in 2017. So with that comes, growing pains and learning processes and things like that. But it's great. It's great to be honest with you, to be on that beginning end of putting this together, the foundational part of it, because we have great potential. We're located in a great location from Atlanta, from the airport, from the new Hollywood. We have Tyler Perry Studios and a lot of different activity going on in this area, and it's just the opportunities are vast in the city of South Fulton. So it's definitely interesting, the learning curve and the growing pains, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And thankfully the city has, as we talked about before, is that a lot of times code enforcement does not get the recognition like Cecilia mentioned. And yes, no, it's not about the recognition, right? It's not about name in the paper and accolades. It's not about that. Me personally, I don't necessarily go for that. It kind of scares me a little bit, but or makes me uncomfortable. But it's about the reason why I promote code enforcement so much, because it's needed. It's needed to know how important this is, how it affects crime, the broken windows theory, safety, engineering, zoning, planning and development. We play an integral role in everything that goes on in the city. We are kind of like the glue to many different departments, one of the few departments that touches everything. So I'm grateful that in this new city they saw code enforcement being that important to be able to do something historic that is not done very much nationwide, and certainly not in Georgia, is to give us the autonomy and the authority to be independent. And we control our agenda, we control our budget, and we can have a greater impact than we already have to this point. So, you know, it's just a blessing to be a part of that and to be a part of something new here in the city of South Fulton. So we'll be continuing to push on and push forward.
Yeah, and some folks forget that there's not a lot of standalone code enforcement departments, and if they're standalone, they're actually under planning or building. I mean, there's different divisions, but for you to have its own department and you being a director, that's pretty amazing. So a lot of times, we're code managers and we sit under planning. So the conversation we had is we never get to sit at that table sometimes with the city manager or the police chief to discuss. So you kind of have to backhand deal sometimes, and and with the zoning manager or whomever, and it makes things a little tough because you just have to jump extra hoops, extra hurdles. And when you're your own department, you have time with the city manager to say what your needs and expectations are, and you get to set your agenda. So that's something awesome.
Right, and Pete, on that note, is something I do want to mention. It just says, it didn't just happen. It didn't just happen, and it's something that was. I got to give kudos to an outstanding code enforcement team that we have here in the city of South Fulton. Man, I mean, I'm talking about just a hands down. I wouldn't trade them for anything. We're right at about 21 total, including admin staff, court team, officers, and supervisors. And what they've done, and I think this is important for anybody that's looking for leadership and looking at leadership in any field. It's important to trust your team. It's important to empower your team, and and that's what I try to do. That's what I've tried to do here, is to allow them to shine, allow them to make decisions, encourage those decisions to be made so that they have ownership of what we do. The accomplishment we made was based on the work that we put in. We went from a team that was, when I got here, quick story, when I got here, September 2019, and everybody I met, from the city manager at the time to every council member to every director, they all looked at me and they said, "Oh, so you're the guy, huh? I'm praying for you."
I love it.
Hey, Pete, the first time I heard it, I said, "Okay, that's a joke, right? That's just a joke." But this is the God to honest truth. After the fifth or sixth person that I saw had the same response, it was like, man, I'm half joking, tongue in cheek, but it's like, I'm praying for you, because we are the headache department, and for whatever reason, the department that I inherited was not running, or the division at the time was not running at optimal speed. So when it comes to managing change, I'm coming in with the new program, right? But like I said, I'm not an extrovert. I'm not a bang my fist on the desk type of guy. But one of the things I did want to do is set standards, right? We have certain standards we have to keep. We want to respond to clients, respond to citizens ASAP. We want to break the mold that code enforcement or the government is non-responsive. We want to break that mold. So when you call us, you get an answer on the first ring. You get a response back within a couple of hours. You get a resolution to your issue within a couple of days, when possible. So that's the kind of program I put in place. But in doing so, inheriting a team of experienced people and some not so experienced, I want to hear first. I want to hear, what do you think? I want to hear, what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? Right? So that way I don't have to think of all the ideas. We got 20 people in this room. What do you see from your day-to-day, from your field perspective? What do you see that will make your job easier? And Pete, sometimes it's a $10 tool, or it's just permission to do a certain process that just hasn't been allowed before. And so a lot of my strategy has been just to kind of get out of the way and say, hey, look, that's a great idea. Go do it.
One of the things that, I bring managers on here, and one thing that all good managers always recognize their staff's talents and abilities, and I think growing, starting from, maybe you'll have two people and you're able to grow a department to 4 or 5 or even 10 or 20. individuals, it speaks volumes of leadership. And one of the reasons that we invite folks like yourself on here is because we see what you're doing out there in the profession, and we really appreciate that. And we want folks to know how important you are and your team is. You're here on a national stage right now, and you're over here praising your staff. That speaks volumes of your leadership, and it speaks volumes of your team. We all know that we're only as good as our team. Phil Jackson wouldn't be Phil Jackson without his team, and the Bulls or the Lakers wouldn't have been them without Phil Jackson either. So I mean, there's volumes to speak when you have that good chemistry and able to do that. I mean, you can accomplish anything. And you speak about standards. I'm all over the country. I'm in the city of Ontario today at California Building Officials Education Week. I'm at a hotel doing this because it's that important to me. Oh, by the way, ACE is going to be in Atlanta next year. So the conference is in Atlanta. So I do expect you to take us out, and Cecilia too, take us out, and shows what the Georgia has to offer. We're looking forward to it.
Awesome. Count on
we already got Mr. Mullins. You're gonna be driving us around too, so that's another one. Yeah. So, but it's just awesome hearing all these different things. Now, you guys were, what do you call it? You guys were a division before, now you're a department, right? And before we got on the air, we talked about how getting a seat at the table, and now you have a seat at the table where you didn't before. And I said, and my comment to you was, before you were the old cousin at the little kids table, and now you're at the big table. So how does that differ now?
Well, Pete, ask me not when I see you in Atlanta next year, man. It's so far, it's so new. It's we're 25 days in. So I'll be on my first council call tonight. It'll be my first council meeting tonight. So far it's interesting, just dealing directly with the with leadership, with the politicians. It takes up a little bit more of my time because I having to deal with some of those additional duties, and I pretty much absorbed my old duties as well. I wasn't replaced, in my old position, which is fine, but I picked up some additional duties when it comes to the legislative items and just dealing directly with those hot issues. So much of which I was doing before. It's not a huge change, but I'm sure there'll be some learning curve issues that I'll go with. But I would like to mention that, I guess the other side of it is, and I talked to you about this a little bit before we got on, is the ugly side of it, right? Just the, in the sense of just keeping it 100% real. And I think this is beneficial, controversial, but beneficial, I think, for other managers and leaders and those that aspire to be managers and leaders, definitely in code enforcement, is that a big part of what I do, and I'm transparent. When I came into the door, I said, hey, look, this is, code enforcement is the Mikey of the city, right? If y'all remember the Mikey back in the 80s, the commercial, give it to Mikey, he'll eat it. Code enforcement is the Mikey of the city.
Right.
And my pet peeve, I have a chip on my shoulder. I will not hide that. I have a chip on my shoulder with some of the level of disrespect that we get, is that we get stuff thrown at us in many cases. Not where I am currently. I'm not speaking on South Fulton, but I just talking with other jurisdictions. It's something we all can relate to, that we get stuff heaped on us. Let Code do it. Let Mikey do it, right? Let Mikey do it. But yet, when it comes to having a seat at the table, when it comes to quality of pay, when it comes to safety, many cases in many jurisdictions, we get forgotten when it comes to that. When it comes to the CARES Act and things like that, when it comes to pay for bonuses for working through the pandemic, we get forgotten about as, we're not first responders, but many times we do get short end of the stick. So that is a pet peeve of mine. And what I've strive to do, and what's a constant battle, and this is what I want to get across, is that learn how to diplomatically throw work that is not yours back across that field, right? Draw a box around yourself. Know what your ordinances say and what they don't say. Know them better than anybody else. Any lawyer, any chief, any administrator, know your ordinance, of course, residents, but know your ordinance. That's your shield. Know that better than anybody else, right? People underestimate the amount of legal acumen you have to really enforce code, rather, zoning codes, engineering, setbacks, and different things that we have to know. And then once you know that, refuse to take on anybody else's work, because oftentimes we're battling perception. And let's say if there's a test with 10 questions on it, right? And code is being graded out at a 60. We're not happy with code. They're only getting 6 out of 10. Well, when you break down those things that we're being graded upon, the perception, you'll find that 2 of those issues, one of them is parking on the streets. Oh, that's police. Or one of them is barking dogs late at night. Oh, that's police and animal control. One of them is litter on the ground on the street. Oh, that's public works. So once you educate the public, and once you educate your peers that may be working with you, that, hey, this is ours, but this is not ours, you have to take that. You know what I'm saying? I'm willing to be held accountable for everything that's in my box, in my code enforcement box. I am not willing to be held accountable for anything that falls outside of my purview. And I'm going to insist that whoever is responsible for that if they don't know they just may not know the ordinance as well as I do. So I'm going to educate them, diplomatically. That's the first time. The second time, we're going to have to elevate that. If you still continue to, when a resident comes with this issue and you say, oh, that's code enforcement. Now, the first time, maybe you didn't know, right? So I'm going to educate you on that. I'm going to show you the ordinance. Second time, maybe you forgot. I'm going to show it to you again. The third time, we're going to have a meeting and a sit down, and we may have to bring in leadership to discuss why we're not training your staff or yourself, and you're putting these issues, these hot potatoes, into our lap. We got enough to deal with. We can't deal with your hot potatoes as well as ours. So that's a controversial approach, but it's something that I find necessary in order to protect my team and protect what we do, is to draw a strong line in the sand about what we do and what we don't do. Educating the public and educating our internal staff as to what those ordinances say and what they don't say.
And I agree, Brian. I spoke to Sharon Guidry on one of our first network podcasts, and she reminded me of the power of saying no. And like I said, when me and you had that conversation about, we're a high performance vehicle, a truck. The more you load us up, the less efficient we become, until overloading and actually ruins the vehicle. So what's the option? You either take some of the load off, or you get us another vehicle, get us the resources. We're one of those, as soon as new ordinances pass, mask enforcement, who they gave it to code enforcement, massage parlor regulations, give it to code enforcement, marijuana dispensary regulations, give it to code enforcement. I mean, we just continue to evolve. The more we're evolving, the more training we need, because the more we're doing, and people forget that. So one of the things is, okay, you want me to enforce this? Give me money for training, give me money for equipment, give me more staffing. And there's an art in doing that as well. And there's also an art in saying no, or like you said, bringing the other people to the table and say, hey, this is your responsibility. We'll help you out because we're a city entity, but at the same time, this is your responsibility. This is your, we're not going to do this for you. I mean, that's an important key, but sometimes on the flip side of what you're saying, sometimes, me as a supervisor, I'll say, okay, we can handle this when we're doing this other duty. If we're there already, we'll handle it. But it's a way to, when, you scratch my back, I scratch your back when we need it, because you have to foster those relationships all the time. It's a constant, but at the same time, you don't want to give somebody a hand and they take an arm. So, I totally understand where you're coming from.
Exactly. And that relationship is important. So it's important to, your public works director, your police chief, your fire chief, we aid in your community development. We aid and assist, quite a bit. And that's along with our external customers. Code enforcement, I would say, is probably the department or division that touches everybody. I can't name another one, Pete, that touches the legal system. It touches engineering. It touches public works. It touches community development, fire, police. The big 7 departments, I think we touch them all. I don't think there are any other departments that do that to that extent that we do on a daily basis. So yes, it's important to get those relationships, and just like any relationship, friend, marriage, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is, that relationship has to be based upon mutual respect, right? So
Yeah, going back to what you said as far as really understanding your ordinance, there's something that, Pete and I like to really hone in on is knowing your craft. You have to know your craft. You have to really be versed in the codes that you're enforcing. You have to really have a true understanding of what those mean. And if you don't, you have to really do that work to prepare yourself to really understand, or to have the backing of your officials to be able to make a call out there. In addition to that, what you said, internal customers are just as important as external customers. So your internal customers, they may think, oh, code enforcement, let's go ahead and just throw it their way, right? So it's really important for us to have that communication, that open line of communication back and forth to educate those other internal customers or other departments within our city jurisdiction, and let them know this is what we do and these are the things we don't do, right? I am a big proponent of meet and greets. In fact, I think that they should happen more often than not, where, the code departments should really be meeting with public works, with law enforcement, with fire, with engineering, with building, with the techs up at the counter, to really have, in planning, to really have that open forum so that everyone understands what is enforceable, what we have as far as standings for enforcement and tools for enforcement, and what are the things that we don't follow up on that would fall under the wheelhouse of other departments that are internal in our jurisdiction. So that, I think, is a really excellent point, because oftentimes we're so auto focused on, we gotta educate the community, we gotta get this information to the community, which is so vital. But a lot of the times we overlook educating the internal customer base, which is important.
very true, and because that's very key. We do develop those relationships, Cecilia, as much as we can. It's important because at the end of the day, our ultimate customer is that citizen. You know what I'm saying? So if we want to, when they say, I came to the city and I asked for a permit, right? A lot of times they don't differentiate between our different divisions and departments. It's either the city succeeded or the city failed, or the county. So we owe it. As I said before, we want to break the mold of government being non-responsive, slow, and inefficient. That's unacceptable. So that interaction between those divisions and departments are great, because we don't want to, at the end of the day, the customer suffers, the citizen suffers. We don't want to bounce them around from department to department and giving them information that's not accurate and correct. So, that you said, you hit the nail on the head, is that communication and that being connected is important, because ultimately we are here to serve. I know we hear it a lot, but it's actually true. They do pay our salaries if you work for a government entity. So what other purpose do we have other than to serve the citizen? That is the entire purpose, literally, of the city, is to serve the citizens. So if we're not doing that, then what are we really doing?
Absolutely. And Brian, an extension of that, like you said, the direct correlation between our delivery, our customer service, and how the customers are perceiving it is so essential. Because when we hear, even us, right, when we're talking to perhaps our mortgage companies or our phone companies, and we get passed on from department to department, from caller to caller, we get frustrated, right? So when folks are calling us and we're just passing on that hot potato and we're not really delivering a service, when they reference their experience with us, they don't say, oh, that Brian or that Cece. They say, oh, that city of such and such, those people at the city of such and such, right? So now we're all bundled in to that lack of customer service. So it's really important for us to be able to solidify those internal relationships and really get, our customer service on point, being able to understand, across the board how we all work collaboratively. And if we don't have an answer to a question, then maybe have a little cheat sheet that says, hey, I know where to transfer you. I don't have that answer, but no worries, I got you. I'm going to transfer you here. Go ahead and ask them that question. They'll be able to assist you, whatever, right? Whatever that may be. That's why, again, it goes back to that strong collaborative relationship forming that we really need.
And one of the things you said, Brian, was, we're one of the only divisions that touch everybody. And guess what? When we're out in the public, we're representing everybody, because a lot of times some folks, the only time they have interaction with anybody in the city is with code enforcement. So sometimes we have to provide that extra customer service, like, hey, we're here to help you. We're not here just to, hey, I'm code enforcement, this is what you have to do, because that opens up to everybody saying, oh yeah, the city, they're a bunch of jerks. What we want is, to bring that partnership, that community relationship when code enforcement touches the public, and say, hey, we want to help. We're here to help you. We're here to serve you, and have that servant mentality. And I think a lot of folks, especially when I'm on the internet and I see people complaining about their jobs. Oh, I hate this guy. Or I hate this. I'm like, hey, did you give the person options? Did you work with them? A lot of times, they're quick to blame the violator, but they don't look at their actual, their tonality or their personal demeanor. I mean, a lot of times, just a smile goes a long way. So
it does. It definitely does, man. And that's something interesting. I talk with my team. We meet a couple times a week, right? So we meet for training on Wednesdays, and then we do more of a logistic meeting on Thursday. And something that we talked about a couple of weeks back was, kind of to your point, Pete, is, perception. And what we talked about was offense versus defense. And that, defense, as far as it relates to code enforcement, how I see it is, knowing your ordinances, responding to complaints, responding to fires, putting them out, but if what we want to focus on is kind of having our processes to the point that we can have those fires in control, and then we can do offense. Offense being community outreach, so we're not just showing up with bad news. We're not always the bearers of bad news. We're also showing up to elderly senior citizen homes, right? So if we can get our processes in place, if our defense is good enough, AKA the Braves, we can have our offense, that was for you, Pete, we can have our offense ready so we can be able to do community outreach. We can promote what we're doing, the good things we're doing in the neighborhood, why we're doing it, what's our purpose. We're doing Trunk or Treat next Saturday, and we have, a big setup for that. So, community, the perception of code enforcement, it's important to be able to do that, to be able to show a different face other than, us just coming to enforce and to fine and penalize.
Awesome. Hey, oh, by the way, we have some spotty areas right now because of the rain, so it says he's in and out. So,
Okay.
so we're not just so. But I think this conversation's long overdue, and especially on talking about the perception of code enforcement out there and the demeanor. That's a whole different conversation in itself. But today it's a pleasure to get to know you. Your story about your jurisdiction, about the process, and for those young people looking out there. Let me see, we have somebody saying, sorry, I arrived so late. Oh, so one of the things that we really want to focus on is just getting to know folks like yourself. I really appreciate you coming on. It's such an honor, a pleasure to meet people from across the country. And I know we had the discussion that we see each other, and now we get to meet. We haven't met in person yet, but we will, in due time. And it's funny because everybody always meets me and I'm like super short. So today I'm walking in down the hallway and some guy goes, "Hey, you're the guy from the internet." I'm like, "Oh, thanks." People listen, people resonate. And I think us bringing a face to code enforcement and humanizing us, saying, "Hey, we're people too, and we're here to serve you and help you, and we're here to make your community better." I think that's our overall goal, and I think that's the message that you delivered today. Brian, thank you.
And Pete, if I could just say, man, I appreciate it so much. I've told you this before, but just the profile that you bring to code enforcement, man, the enthusiasm and the passion that you bring is evident. You know, it's evident. You are the internet code enforcement guy. You know, so it's so important because this field is important to me, and it's important for cities around this country, man. And it's the higher that we can raise our profile and show our professionalism, is better for the field in its entirety. So thank you, man. Thank you, and thanks CC. Even though she dropped off, but it was a pleasure meeting you both. And look forward to seeing you in Atlanta in a little while, man. So I had just one more time, sir.
Hey, you took us out of the series. Well deserved. Well played, sir. So, but yeah, for all those watching, Brian is from South Fulton, Georgia. If you look him up, you probably get his email if you have any questions for him. I could always reach that proque@fourleafinc.com if you guys have any questions. But one of the things that we do try to do is showcase those that are making a positive impact in our profession. And thank you, Brian, for joining us. Wish CC was still here to bid you goodbye, but thank you very much, and we appreciate your time with us.
Thank you, Pete. It's been an honor.
All right, thank you. Bye, everybody.